Hi, free science with information on Fukushima. The topic of this video was suggested by a friend and is interesting because of the flood of information that is available. At the end, I will summarize some scholarly articles from NCBI PubMed. It's a great source for scholarly articles on any subject. This is going to be a little long, so bear with me. Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, owned and run by Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO for short, was the site of a disaster on Friday, March 11th, 2011. A 9.0 magnitude earthquake occurred 130 kilometers, or about 80 miles, off the coast of Sendai, Japan. This sent 15-meter tsunami waves toward the nuclear power plant. 3 nuclear reactors melted down, and 160,000 people had to be evacuated. No one died as a direct result of the nuclear disaster, but most of the people who were evacuated haven't gotten to go back home yet. The disaster and early explosions were the source of most of the radioactive elements introduced into the environment, and radioactivity has been decreasing ever since. The reactor would have been fine if it was only the earthquake and seismic waves, but the tsunami disrupted everything. The tsunami destroyed all of the backup systems in place for cooling reactors, so the nuclear material heated up. To be clear, experts at Princeton University have placed the Fukushima disaster at a 5 on the International Nuclear Event Scale, or INES, which is designated as an accident with wider consequences. Compare this to Chernobyl in 1986, which placed the highest rating on the INES scale, a 7, which is called a major accident. Access to the sites is very limited because of the radiation, so the exact extent of the damage from the meltdowns is uncertain, but they do send robots in. Since the dust from the quake and meltdowns and tsunami settled, it has been a matter of keeping the material from heating up too much. They do this using water pumps to constantly cool the nuclear material. It is slated to take about 4 decades to finish the cleanup, with uncertain long-term effects. Oh, and about the water being released into the ocean, here's a quote from the World Nuclear Association. A large amount of contaminated water has accumulated on site and has been treated to remove all but traces of tritium, which limits the potential to release treated water to the sea. Some radioactivity has been released to the sea, but this has mostly been low level and has not had any significant impact beyond the immediate plant structures. Concentrations outside these structures have been below regulatory levels since April 2011. This next quote, I think, is the most definitive. Anthropogenic radionuclides have been detected in very small quantities in foodstuffs along the west coast of North America. For example, 131L, I'm not sure what that stands for, was detected in Fucus seaweed in Vancouver, Canada, at a maximum activity of 4,930 becquerels per kilogram following the CNPP accident. That's Chernobyl. Shortly after the FDNPP releases, that's Fukushima, seaweed from the same general area had activities of 130 becquerels per kilogram. That is Chester et al. In 2013. A quote in a report from the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission offers a little, but not much, contrast. Apart from a few isolated locations directly outside the plant's outlet, the contamination levels remain safely below World Health Organization guidelines for drinking water. That report was written in 2015. So, all sources indicate that the seawater seems to be okay. So, in contrast to sites you may have seen that said the entire Pacific Ocean is contaminated, it's not. Everything's fine. So why not just let the nuclear material heat up and burn? Why must we imperil workers' lives and spend ridiculous amounts of money and time to clean up these melted reactors? The reason we can't just abandon the site is because when the nuclear material heats up, it gets so hot that it melts right through the ground. This means that it would eventually melt through the concrete barrier into the environment and cause untold catastrophe. It could run into groundwater supplies, instantly boiling them, contaminating them. Radiation could end up in the atmosphere. All kinds of disastrous things could happen. Unit 1 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant got to 2,800 degrees Celsius. The list of elements with melting points higher than that is very short. On the subject of contamination, what does it mean physically? What levels should we be worried about? The difference between becquerels and sieverts should be clarified. Becquerels are decays per second in a substance. Keep in mind that 2,000 becquerels, or 2,000 decays per second, in a gallon is much less than 2,000 becquerels in a thimble. When measuring food, they talk about becquerels per kilogram, as you saw in that report from Chester et al. Earlier. Sieverts, on the other hand, are a measure of damage from radiation to the body. Different kinds of radiation damage the body to different degrees. The most damaging is alpha radiation, which is the breakdown of a nucleus involving the emission of an alpha particle, which is just a helium nucleus. The particle flies at high energy through the tissues and knocks things around. They talk about tritium, which is radioactive hydrogen bonding in the body wherever hydrogen bonds. This means that when it undergoes radioactive decay, whatever position it held in the tissue, which was supposed to be hydrogen, is now a helium atom. This messes things up, causes cancer, lesions, all kinds of nasty stuff. The following data are for single doses. Doses of 100 millisieverts are related to increased cancer risk. 1,000 millisieverts causes sickness, nausea. 5,000 kills half of the people exposed to this level in a month. 10,000 millisieverts, or 10 sieverts, is fatal within weeks. The last thing I will address is the atmospheric dispersion of radionuclides as a result of the accident. For anyone who doesn't know, we get exposed to radiation from many natural sources, including cosmic rays and terrestrial radiation. Any nuclear events that occur because of man add to these sources. Now, some radioactive substances stick around longer than others, which means that only a few of them will be around after a long time. So the ones they worry about most are the long-lived ones. So when taking atmospheric counts into consideration, they have to account for the addition of Fukushima Daiichi disaster separately from other events whose effects we are still feeling, like Chernobyl and the nuclear testing from the 1950s to the 1980s. The good news is radionuclides diffuse into the atmosphere into concentrations that are not harmful after a while. I will summarize one study and then quote an abstract of another study in regards to these issues, the atmospheric issues, in a minute. But because I said that they worry about the long-lived radionuclides the most, does not mean that they don't worry about the short-lived ones too. The short-lived ones cause tons of damage as well. So I may have been erring in saying that. So underground measurements of artificial radioactivity in squids from the Western Pacific Ocean. This is the first study off of NCBI. These are getting into the studies I was talking about earlier. This is from Zheng et al. And the abstract is as follows. I didn't have access to this study. Some of these studies cost, some of them aren't free, some of them cost 30, 40 bucks to get in. So this is one of the ones I didn't have access to. So to investigate the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant accident's radiological effect on marine ecosystem, ash samples of squids from the Western Pacific Ocean were collected in May 2014 and measured using an underground gamma ray spectrometer in the underground laboratory Jinping. Low levels of silver 108, silver 110, cesium 134, and cesium 137. Those two cesium isotopes, those are long-lived, were detected, which indicates that the influence of the FDNPP accident in the marine ecosystem is lasting but decreasing. Keep in mind earlier that all the studies indicate that things are at a level that is deemed not harmful. So plutonium isotopes 239, 241 dissolved in Pacific Ocean waters detected by accelerator mass spectrometry. No effects of the Fukushima accident observed. It's the title of another study. This is by Hain, Festerman, Fimiani, et al. The abstract says that levels of plutonium were consistent with nuclear weapon fallout, so nothing to worry about there. Now, this next study, I looked at this study because you hear about how strontium 90 is integrated into bone because the body recognizes it as calcium. So I thought it would be important to know something about the concentrations. And this is called Surveillance of Strontium 90 in Foods After Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Plant Accident by Hiromi Nabeshi, Tomoki Tsutsumi et al. They analyzed food, this is just a summary, this is not a direct quote. They analyzed food from all over Japan. The study included a bunch of data for cesium as well. they found that levels of radionuclides for most of the foods were consistent with levels that existed before the accident. Freshwater fish and shellfish was the only category that showed an increase, but this increase still fell below the accepted standard limit. The limit was set at 100 becquerels per kilogram, down from 500 before the accident by the Japanese government. In contrast, the US government has limits of, I think, around 1,200 becquerels per kilogram. They said at the end of the article that they will continue to monitor these levels. And as a side note, this article does mention that the amount of outflow of radionuclides for the plant remains unclear. The study was published in 2015. And this is the dispersion of Fukushima radionuclides in the global atmosphere and the ocean. And this is by Povenica, or M. Garab and K. Holia et al. Sorry if I mispronounced any names there. And this is the abstract. Large quantities of radionuclides were released in April 2011 during the accident of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant to the atmosphere and the ocean. The measured and simulated cesium-137 concentrations in atmospheric aerosols and in water are compared with global fallout in the Chernobyl accident, which represent the main sources of the pre-Fukushima radionuclide background in the environment. The radionuclide concentrations in the atmosphere have been negligible when compared with the Chernobyl levels. The maximum cesium-137 concentration in surface waters of the open Pacific Ocean will be around 20 becquerels per meters cubed. The plume will reach the U.S. coast 4 to 5 years after the accident. However, the levels will be below 3 becquerels per meter cubed. All the North Pacific Ocean will be labeled with Fukushima cesium-137 10 years after the accident, with concentrations below 1 becquerel per meter cubed. And so you hear something like that and you say, all of the Pacific Ocean will be labeled with it. Well, remember that food limits are 100 becquerels per kilogram at their strictest in Japan and around 1,200 here. So nothing really to worry about there. Detailed distribution map of absorbed dose rate, this is another study, in air in Takatsu area of Chiba Prefecture, Japan. Constructed by Car-Borne Survey 4 years after the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant accident. So that's the title of this study. This is by Kazumasa Inu, Moiko Arai, Makoto Fujisawa et al. Again, sorry if I mispronounce names. I pulled this study because it is one case of measurement from the atmospheric effects from the event in discussion. The study says that the Takatsu area of the Chiba Prefecture in Japan was the worst hit area in that prefecture. They drove around and measured radiation levels all over that area. The results? Here's a quote. The external effective dose calculated based on dose rate from natural and artificial radionuclides for Takatsu area was 0.20 millisieverts per year, which is 42% of the worldwide average. All right, so things seem to be okay. It's a disaster. It was bad. Things seem to be okay. It's going to be expensive. It was a terrible thing. People can't go home, but it's not apocalyptic. So anyways, to wrap up, the controversy over nuclear energy is ongoing, and it has highlighted events such as this. Other concerns over nuclear energy are how to dispose of radioactive waste and how to ensure countries with volatile, unstable, or irresponsible governments will use nuclear power without developing weapons. This latter concern is beyond the scope of this video, but the former constitutes a huge problem. Recently, former President of the United States, Barack Obama, denied the storage of nuclear waste at Yucca Mountain. They had been surveying the site to make sure it would remain geologically stable for the next 10,000 years. After almost 30 years of surveying and research, it was denied. Currently, most high-level radioactive waste is stored on site at nuclear reactors. A long-term storage option will be necessary at some point. The other option is to use it safely somehow. Another recent breakthrough involving diamonds and nuclear waste occurred. They use radioactive graphite to make diamonds that generate electric currents. So they're talking about making batteries out of diamonds that last thousands of years. It's amazing. Uh, who knows what is possible with future research? They could do all kinds of things. The other thing is the ITER, the fusion project, one of the fusion projects. There's several fusion projects going on. That's it. Thank you.